Welcome to Hamburger Business Review, Season 2, Episode 4. I'm your host, Mike Merrill.
And I'm your host, Zach Rose. Today we're talking about McDonald's expansion into India starting way back in 1996.
We've got more from my adventures as a fast food employee and more on Zach's annual trek to visit every McDonald's in Manhattan on foot in just 24 hours.
And I'm producer Chris Higgins. And you know what? I feel like we've never talked about eating McDonald's on a plane. What's up with that?
RFK versus Trump's fast food habit. This is a story from the New York Times.
Oh, God. Two men I love talking about each other.
I saw the story and two people sent me this story. This story came at me as a person who is covering the hamburger business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's the quote from RFK. The food that he eats is really bad, Mr. Kennedy said, recounting the offerings on Mr. Trump's plane. Campaign food is always bad, but the food that goes onto that airplane is just poison. You have a choice between, you don't have a choice. You're either given KFC or Big Macs. That's like when you're lucky, and the rest of the stuff I consider kind of inedible.
It's so brutal. And I love these two insane characters that are just okay, we're linking arms, we're going for it. And he's like, but I don't like the food that you eat. I think you're gross. And I also love that alternative medicine is now anti-fast food.
I mean, hasn't that always been the case, kind of?
I guess, but it feels like regular medicine is anti-fast food. You don't have to be alternative to be anti-fast food.
Fair.
You know what's interesting is the other fringe candidate who talks about food choices in America is Marianne Williamson.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks about it's actually ag policy to grow all this corn, which nobody else says that I've heard on any part of the Democratic Party.
I mean, this is the least crazy thing he said ever that I can remember. Saying that fast food is essentially poison. I'm just yeah, you're okay, yeah, this makes sense. Go ahead, be in charge of health.
Well, and then the other part of this is this segment. This is in the New York Times. Continuing the block quote, Mr. Kennedy said he recently sat on the plane next to Dana White, the chief executive of the mixed martial arts company Ultimate Fighting Championship. He said Mr. White told him he would sometimes sit through an hours-long flight with Mr. Trump, quote, and he's never seen Trump drink a glass of water, end quote.
Who needs water when you have so much Diet Coke? Our next story is also celebrity related. It's another one that had popped up for me a couple of times, but I hadn't actually read it because it kind of felt, what do you call the news that's doesn't matter? Like the chum bucket, at the bottom of an article where it's just, it feels like one of those. But
yeah.
Having read it today, I was mildly amused. It's Pharrell Williams was fired from McDonald's 3 times. It's a BuzzFeed article where he talks about he was fired for being lazy and he was fired for eating the McNuggets while on shift at McDonald's. I found that incredibly funny to think of a young 18-year-old just spending the time on his shift eating nuggets.
Do you have a McNugget-like product at your hamburger restaurant, Mike?
Yeah, and I mean, he talks about the sauces, the sweet and sour and the ranch combo and how perfect it is. And I've seen the effect that this has on people in how they order. People love to dip in their particular sauces. They find their combo of sauces flavor profile. It's funny because I feel like him talking about being fired and then going on to be so successcul sort of flies in the face of the 1 in 8 campaign that McDonald's has been hyping in terms of the great alumni of McDonald's. I was maybe they should have a special asterisk or a special condition of these are people that have been fired from McDonald's.
Well, and to be clear, according to Pharrell, the first 2 firings were due to laziness and only the third was due to inappropriate McNugget situations.
Mike, how hard would it be for you to eat the McNugget-like product at your hamburger restaurant while you're on the job? How would you go about it?
I want to know how hard it would be to get fired for doing that.
I mean, if you did it once, if you ate food while on shift while you're supposed to be working, that would be insane at my hamburger restaurant. I think you wouldn't get fired the first time. People would just be what are you thinking? Why would you think this is okay at all?
You can't work and munch.
Yeah, he must have been working in the back, in the kitchen. Because I do remember when I worked in high school, there was definitely some eating if you were working on the grill, especially if you were a teenager. If you're out front or doing anything else, I don't think you're munching on nuggets. Charlie Munger has this great kind of story that he keeps saying over and over and over again about how he believes that McDonald's is a better educator than most colleges. And he's repeated this so many times about essentially how McDonald's trains, again, 1 in 8, like an entire workforce of people, gives them their first job, shows them responsibility, teaches all of these valuable skills, and his preference for that style of education versus higher education.
Not unlike the military.
I imagine that Pharrell Williams probably also would have got fired from the military.
For eating too many chicken McNuggets.
Or for just being lazy.
And the holiday pie is back.
The holiday pie is back.
The holiday pie is back?
I've never had the holiday pie.
Zach, I didn't even know there was a holiday pie.
I literally don't know what this is.
I've heard about it. I don't think I've ever had it. And it's been around for 15 years, they say.
Isn't it more? I think it's 25 years, isn't it?
Oh, gosh. 25 years.
Somebody was saying it came out at the same time as Toy Story 2, which I'm like, oh, okay. For reference, we're on Toy Story 4 or 5 now or something,
That's how we tell time now, is which Toy Story are we on?
That's how many Toy Stories.
I mentioned this to Catherine. I was like, I didn't know there was one. And then she loves birthday cake flavoring, with like multicolors, even though that's not a flavor. But anyway, I mentioned that the holiday pie has these sort of multicolored sprinkles. And I was like, that's not something I associate with holidays. It feels more birthday. And she pointed out that perhaps this is a celebration of the birth of Christ, which I thought was unlikely, but humorous. I did actually pick up a holiday pie.
Okay, Mike has a brown paper bag. And what does that say on it there, Mike?
Just says, McCafe pie, enjoy by 3:30. Ooh, a little over time.
Wait, 3:30 p.m.?
Well, I think that's serving time. I don't think that's eating time.
Okay, what's 3:39 p.m. now, so...
Let's see. It's, oh yeah, look.
Okay, we're removing it from the package. Describe that, will you?
It looks like...
God, it looks like a Hot Pocket.
Yeah, I was going to say a Hot Pocket made love to a Pop-Tart. It has very, very small, round, little, what are those called? These things have a name, sprinkles?
Oh, no, the nonpareils?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Zach. The nonpareils. Okay, I'm going to break it open and look inside.
So wait, is that a French word? Should we ask Catherine what that means?
Nonpareil. A tiny, variously colored pellet of sugar used to decorate cakes, cookies, etc.
Oh, it's gooier in there than I expected.
Oh, we've got a white goo.
Yeah, we got a white goo.
Kind of a cross section. Okay, a bite is happening.
Wow.
Is that good? Wow.
It has a strong.
The initial reaction is what?
It tastes like candy. It's like it's really familiar. It's like an animal cracker, but they've dialed up the sweetness.
Wow.
Is it apple-y or?
No, it's custard. It's like
Is it eggnog?
So maybe it's like cinnamon or
eggnog adjacent, but not cinnamon at all. It's a very
like vanilla.
Very vanilla. The pastry is man, I'm remembering something and I can't quite place it. It's too sweet, but it's pretty good. I bought 2 of these, and Catherine is going to be very excited because this is very up her alley. That's not that far off from my review of the chicken Big Mac. This seems fine, but I don't know that it needs to exist. It was sort of the short version of what I thought of it.
Well, with that ringing endorsement, let's move along to a discussion of Mike's Hamburger Restaurant. Mike, as listeners will know, you have been working at a hamburger restaurant now for over 3 weeks, right? Is it 4 weeks now?
Yeah, I think it's been about 4 weeks, yeah.
You gotten a paycheck yet?
Yeah, I've gotten a couple. I've gotten 3 paychecks.
Oh, how's that working out for you?
It's pretty fun. I give half of whatever I make to my partner right off the bat.
Uh-huh.
Because she's been supporting me for a very long time, to an extent at which I probably will not be able to repay working at a hamburger restaurant. And then, then I have a small amount of money again, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
Get paid every 2 weeks. It's changed my spending habits. Even though I'm making more money than I was, I now have a sense of how expensive everything is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The first version of that happened with just thinking what my hourly rate and thinking of things. But now I'm like, oh, it's this slotted amount for that period of time. And I have to really make sure I spend it on things that actually matter.
Give me an example of that.
I was really bummed out. I bought this like expensive art book and I thought that I paid for it already. So when it came, I was really excited because I was like, okay, that was the last one. And like, it's already paid for. But because I had pre-ordered it through Amazon, they didn't charge me until it shipped.
Ooh, yeah.
And so I was like, ooh, that one hurt a little bit. You know, it was like $60.
So how many paychecks did that eat up by itself?
How many hours? Yeah.
I mean, it was 3 hours of my time.
Okay.
Which looking back, I'm like, that's right on the edge. I do love an art book, you know. That one was a little hard. I now don't stop at my favorite coffee shop as often.
Interesting.
And get a cup of coffee at Endorphine in downtown Los Angeles. At my hamburger restaurant, I can drink free coffee. At home, I can make coffee for far cheaper. Going out and buying a really nice, expensive cup of coffee from a former chemist who just makes arguably the best coffee I've ever had in my life. I can't do that as frequently.
I'm curious. We've talked about the sort of 30-year gap between your high school experience at a hamburger restaurant and your experience now. And in thinking about that, I think about what has changed sort of societally since then. And one of those things is cell phones. And I'm wondering, how do cell phones inhabit the restaurant environment now? And maybe how that compares to what you might remember of it before. Like, and I'm also thinking when I'm around folks with cell phones, people are just kind of on their phone a lot, or they'll have like an earbud or both in while they're doing something else. What are the expectations around phones or having, for example, headphones or earphones or whatever in while you're working? What's going on there?
Definitely no earbuds in. And everyone who looks at their phone does it kind of surreptitiously. Like it's not okay. You're not supposed to be on your phone in any meaningful way while you're on shift. So breaks, meals, that's fine. What's interesting is I do on Reddit, on one of the McDonald's employee Reddits, someone posted a photo of a sign that was like the policy, which was not only don't be on your phone, but like don't be on your phone even on your break, even on your lunch break, even if you're not working and you're in the restaurant.
Oh.
This whatever local operator just had the most insanely rigid interpretation of that rule that was clearly out of bounds and out of line.
Like hamburger restaurant employees just don't have phones. They live in a more cultured time or something.
Yeah, like you're going to put it in a locker and not touch it until after.
They have perfectly reliable childcare. They have, they can give their full attention to the job.
No other responsibilities in life. Yeah.
Yeah, it was insane. So yeah, definitely not that rigid at my hamburger restaurant, but it's generally like if you're working, you're not looking at your phone. Now, I have been on drive-through. It's been slow enough that I have occasionally looked at it. Usually work-related, weirdly.
Okay, like what?
Well, my hamburger restaurant also has an app, and so sometimes I'll price compare.
Oh, you want to check the app, kind of?
Yeah, and see like, oh, how do you do this? Or what does the price show there versus how can I ring it up? And I'll kind of compare that way.
Are you looking for like how to get a good deal for the customer or just?
Usually, yeah. Is it cheaper to do it this way or that way? And what do they see versus what do I see? Those experiences are different.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about like, people trying to customize a menu item and you're trying to figure out what is the most costly component of the item. Is that part of the app?
Yeah, it's really limited on the app of what you can do customization wise. So usually all of that is done. Oh, okay. Verbally through drive-through or, in person at the front counter. There are limits even that the software allows you to do. And we've talked about this before. There's that special request button that I can kind of add and you just yell back into the kitchen, can you do blank?
What do you think the split is for a customer coming in, especially to the drive-through, in terms of ordering the old-fashioned way, like using their voice, versus having pre-ordered with the app? What's the breakdown there?
It's definitely the minority, but it's steady use of the app. And there's different...
The app is the minority?
Yeah, by far. Most people don't want to bother. There's a small section of people that actually are anti the app. And honestly, more power to them. And then there's probably a big chunk that they use it on occasion or they use it not for the full pre-order experience, but they'll just do the points or get a discount with it. So we're still entering their information, but they're also giving us a code that lets them get some kind of discount. So there's multiple ways to do it. The best is when an order comes through fully prepaid, fully ordered when you're working drive-through, because it's just you look them up, you enter it, you're done. next car. You don't have to worry about anything at all. Feels like a little mini, 2-second vacation.
Are you the kind of person who's addicted enough to your phone that you miss having it if you haven't interacted with it for hours on a shift?
I'm not. I'm actually one of the worst texters you've ever met in your life. And all of my friends know this. And it's actually granted me leeway in terms of people's expectations of me texting back or responding. So yeah, I can go without pretty easily. It doesn't bother me too much. There's definitely people who I see kind of stealing glances at their phone more often. On Saturdays, there's this younger kid that I work with who's very good. He's very on it on everything, but he's always kind of and he's looking at sports scores because he's a big college football fan.
Yeah.
So he has to know what's happening. It's not enough to see it later. So he's always kind of peeking or whatever.
Uh-huh.
There's cameras inside the hamburger restaurant, which I assume are mostly for security. I don't think they're really spying on us. But sometimes if we're working drive-thru together and I see him, I'll kind of block the camera for him and shift over. Just he's not hurting anybody. He's not doing anything. So I try to help out where I can.
So at the restaurant, is there music playing in the background? Is there a TV on or anything?
I feel like many hamburger restaurants have had television sets. I feel like I've been to a Burger King before that has had the news on or something.
Some locations do.
But yeah, no, there's music playing. What's funny is I feel like on the weekends, it's only playing in the dining area. So there's no music in the back at all. The times that I've worked out on the front counter or been in the dining area, it's usually pretty upbeat. It's very Muzak generic. But I feel like weekend mornings, there's a chill setting. And I haven't done it enough to know this for sure, but my theory is that there's some sort of mood dial that they're adjusting per time. Super curious how that works. I don't know who's even programming it.
On McTrot last year, when I stopped at my local restaurant in Harlem, my local McDonald's, they had a Silverchair song playing that I hadn't heard since 1996.
Right.
And it took me a day of just thinking about that song to even remember whether it was Silverchair or not, or find it. And it all came back. I don't know why. I don't know who did the research and decided that that's what needed to play at Harlem at dinner time.
Exactly. And what is that universal? Is there one McDonald's radio station, one Burger King station, one Subway station? Or are all of these, I assume because of the individual kind of owner operators, it's sort of solutions based on what they want to play, but
then there's the rights issues, there's clearance issues, right?
Yeah, so, and that the brand itself would want to say something about that as well.
Yeah. For example, Starbucks, I think pretty famously has gotten tied into music over the years and had giveaway cards and stuff at the front. And so I think that they are definitely doing programming for all their stores. And I just wonder how that differs. If you ever can find out, where does the music come from? Which of those computerized boxes in the server room does it emanate from? And is there a button on there to change it?
I looked under the drive-thru on Tuesday and for the first time noticed that one of the little lines of cords that's covered in a little protective box runs into this kind of larger distribution box. It just said biscuit box, hand labeled. And I was like, is that a technical term? Does this have something to do with breakfast biscuits? I don't know what a biscuit box is. It sounds like it's probably technical, but who's that for?
Yeah.
Who's going into it's gross back there. It can't, I've thought about trying to clean it, but it's you can't move the terminals. You'd have to stop ordering in order to clean back there, and you can never stop the drive-through.
Yeah.
So I was like, when do you get to go back there? And again, I've talked about this before. The cord management is horrible, but I was like, you can't tie all the cords up because they did have to swap out the unit once because it wasn't working. So they had to bring in a different one. It's if you had all your cords beautifully, cabled together, you'd have to snip all those anyway. I don't know. It's chaos.
It's like space station aesthetics where it looks like a mess, but it's actually super functional. It's so functional that that's why it is the way it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So Mike, last thing for this week, and obviously, again, I have a list that's pretty long. You'd mentioned at one point that you have what you called, I think, a civilian deodorant versus a work deodorant. What's up with that?
I'm not a very sweaty person generally.
Sure.
I found a deodorant that I liked that's a little bit too expensive, but it's a eucalyptus Malin and Goats.
Is it like a hippie deodorant or?
No, it's like a high-end fancy brand. It used to be near my work when I worked.
Where does one purchase this? Yeah.
You can get it on Amazon or anywhere. Yeah, it's a major brand, but
not at like the grocery store kind of thing.
No, exactly. It's like, yeah, so maybe a lower high tier or a upper mid tier deodorant. And I like it. It smells great. It's fine. I noticed that running around a hamburger restaurant all day, the heat of the fry station, the amount of movement I would get if I was, working in the front, my deodorant was not up to the challenge. And at my gym, they have these, cans of spray on Right Guard that are some of the most powerful deodorants I've ever used. And I don't actually like the smell of them very much.
No.
But Catherine loves the smell of them.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think she grew up in like hotels and sports environments in the 80s, and it was probably like the smell of those environments. So I think because she's liked it, I have sort of developed an appreciation. It's nice when your partner says that you smell good, even if you don't really love the smell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that has become my work deodorant, is this kind of Right Guard, works for 72 hours.
Wait,
overkill.
really?
That's what it says. It's some crazy.
The one I use says 48 hours, which I'm like, that's bad enough. Like, I know I'm just like, causing some sort of future damage to myself by putting this stuff on. But 48 hours is a long time. 72 hours is insane.
I started looking into it, and there is a Right Guard that's a 24-hour one, and then there's somehow one that's, maybe it's only 48. I don't know. But like the difference, I'm like, what does that mean? I don't know what.
Yeah.
I'm only working like 8 hours, so either way,
do you not
overkill.
shower during the course of the 72 hours? I mean,
yeah, I just reapply, I guess.
Astronauts.
Space station, yeah, exactly.
The difference between using a spray versus a roll or whatever deodorant is pretty insane. At the gym, it's a big locker room. You spray your armpits. There's a little bit of that stuff in the air. When you do that in your enclosed own bathroom, I feel like I have to immediately leave, like I'm breathing it in. It's probably terrible for me, but deodorant feels like it's important in that environment.
And when you come back from a day at the restaurant, how are you smelling?
Depends on what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Whether you're in the kitchen or...
If it's a full day drive-through, usually pretty fine.
Uh-huh.
But, if I'm working where I'm either interacting again with like the fry station or any of the food, or even just in the front where I'm moving around a lot more, then I feel like I'm absorbing a lot more of the energy of the hamburger restaurant. Yeah.
Right on. All right. Well, let's keep moving. Before we get to McTrot, though, I want to talk business. So for those of you at home who are businesses, represent a business, have other commercial interests, have you found yourself wondering how you could be on this show, how you could reach the audience that we reach, the business and burger savvy listeners of Hamburger Business Review? Well, imagine if the three of us could talk about your business, your product, your service, whatever. Wouldn't that be profitable? Wouldn't that be lovely for you? Wouldn't that help your bottom line? If that sounds appealing to you, reach out to us at hamburgerbusinessreview.com for information about becoming a podcast sponsor. We are currently not sponsored, but we want to be, and you can help. All right, for our new listeners, Zach, we're talking McTrot. Now, again, we've covered this a couple times, but I just want to do quickly. Give me the core pitch. What is McTrot? When does it happen?
The core pitch is eating at every McDonald's in Manhattan on foot within 24 hours. And it happens the Friday before Thanksgiving. That's what I'm settling on. It was Thanksgiving the first year and then something like that the second year. But going forward, I'm going to try and say Friday before Thanksgiving.
All right. I'm loving it already. But that means, given our recording schedule, that's the Friday after next, right? Like it's next week.
Yes, it's coming up very quickly. Yeah, it's the week after this week.
So we're going to probably record one more of these and then you're McTrotting.
Yeah. I'll probably send you some voice notes from the McTrot.
You better.
I just want to interject really quick and say, I think that Zach has gotten incredibly used to this idea of the McTrot, and sort of by proxy, so have I, and now we've sort of indoctrinated Chris to this idea.
Mm-hmm.
This is an insane thing to do.
Yeah, it seems real normal,
I love it so much. I just remember the first time that Zach proposed it, I couldn't understand. It didn't seem like it was even a possible endeavor. And so just the attempt of it
Right.
was like blew my
The audacity.
mind. And exactly. And so I just don't want to lose that element as we talk about like, oh, and now we're going on to our McTrot place. No, let's remember the, like you said, the audacity of this. Yeah.
Yes.
This is a massive undertaking.
And again, the number of restaurants we're talking is, what was it, like 50-ish?
Yeah, it's 48 this year.
So we know that for sure. And you've now tracked down the current list of what's open, and we think it's at 48.
I got to check on Union Square. They were doing some asbestos abatement and remodeling, but I think they're done now. And there's also Broadway and 159th. The app says they're open 24 hours, but at the store, they seem to say like they open at 6. So that makes a difference.
So this is coming up real soon. We're going to have one more check-in before it happens. Are you ready?
I think so. I'm readier than I've ever been. I'm in better shape for this than I've ever been. I'm trying new like outfits, new gear. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of time making a digital map in some open source geospatial software. I don't think I'm going to have time to finish that and print it out. So I just got a new paper map of Manhattan sent to me today that I'm going to go through and put colored dots on and start thinking about the route.
How big is that paper map? Like if you were to fold it out or, put it up in person, is it pocket sized? Or?
Yeah, this one's pretty small. I think it's like 2 feet wide and 1.5 feet tall.
Okay.
But it's nicely, it's got like a detail section of downtown, and I don't need that much detail for Inwood. So I think it'll work out.
So you can see roads and everything, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And also I kind of know them a little bit better. I've had larger paper maps in the past, but this year I'm feeling pretty confident about getting around.
Zach, have you reviewed Chris Kay's tips for running the Chicago Marathon?
No. What are they?
He has a post about it. He says, find your fuel.
First, find your fuel.
Okay, easy.
And then he says, nothing new on race day.
Second thing, nothing new on race day.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
And then he says, trust your training.
And then lastly, trust your training.
Yeah, I love that one. Thanks, Chris.
Your fuel is, again, apple slices, right?
Mostly apple slices.
When we first talked about this, you kind of hinted at, in the beginning of the pandemic, you ate some more McDonald's, and then there's been some health changes since then. Can you tell me what's up with that?
Yeah, well, I guess I was pretty healthy before the pandemic, and did a lot of stress eating, some living in the suburbs, a lot of driving.
And where were you living at that point?
I was living in suburban Austin, Texas for the most part of the pandemic. Then moved to New York City, had a very small apartment that didn't really have a kitchen. So I was eating bagels and diner food and McDonald's a lot. I was walking the dog, but it wasn't really adding up. So I gained a lot of weight. And then I also threw my back out a few times, enough that eventually I just had this horrible herniated disc. And I went to the ER in pain one night because it was so bad.
Ooh, yeah.
Since then, yeah, different phases have kicked in. The best part was probably a physical therapist who helped me find the exercises that were going to make me better without, doing more damage. And then I've just started eating better and getting steps in and things like that. So altogether, watching my blood pressure.
So that's where the sodium comes in, I assume.
Yeah. And so over the last 2 years, I think I've lost 50 pounds. LDL is down, HDL is up, hypertension is pretty much fixed. I'm sort of almost off meds for that. Hitting the elliptical trainer basically every day.
Nice.
Getting 10,000 steps in and cutting down on McDonald's a lot because I have my shareholder dividend days and I have McTrot, and those are my 5 days a year when I eat at McDonald's. It all helps. It all helps me when I'm on the elliptical. It's fun to think about being better at McTrot in November.
Yeah, I think it's great to have a goal. Is the elliptical in the place where you live, or do you have to go to a gym to get there?
It's across the street, and it's an arc trainer, not an elliptical, so slightly different, but yeah.
You also mentioned previously that when you see a place or you hear about a place in Manhattan now, you can think about oh, that's near this McDonald's because you've been to all the McDonald's, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if anything comes to mind about other things that you notice now, because you've been on these walks, or things that you're now more acquainted with because of these walks or other walks that you take.
The biggest thing was when I started looking into historical McDonald's locations to find out, what's come and gone, what's been there the longest. Mm-hmm. And then I started visiting those ones in person and realized that they're all 1 to 2 story buildings. And the first McDonald's in Manhattan, I think, is on 96th and Broadway. And it's still 1 story. And if you look, the building next to it has built this like cantilevered extension over the 2-story McDonald's and up into the sky. You know, the Union Square McDonald's is like a short 2-story building that's surrounded by much taller buildings. And I think what's happening here is that Manhattan, even in the 70s, was a shorter place, like less vertical place. For McDonald's to come around and do well in a neighborhood and stay there, they're just not interested in any kind of change at all. And so all the buildings just kind of grow up taller than the McDonald's. That's like the main thing that strikes me is noticing like how, you know, I think of like New York City growing vertical, like maybe that's early 20th century, but it's like an ongoing thing that ripples out throughout the city.
I'm curious, Zach, you mentioned researching these locations. What does that research look like?
I don't know what got me into this originally, but I think I had like a free afternoon. It occurred to me that there must be some way to find out where the old McDonald's were. And I did some looking around and I went to the New York Public Library website, and it seemed like, well, McDonald's would have been in the Yellow Pages, and all of the Yellow Pages in some form are at the New York Public Library. So I went down there, and yeah, after like 79 is when the collection starts, and they have every year. And it's on either microfilm or microfiche, and you can use them. I had to learn how to use the machine, and it makes all these cool noises. And you get, you can scan into PDF and email yourself from the library computer. So I have all these scans of microfiche of old Yellow Pages.
By the way, we should explain for folks who are younger, there used to be a thing called a phone book, which had all the...
Oh, God, so many steps here.
Right. There used to be a thing called a telephone. Anyway.
You used to have to know the number to dial it.
And there was a book where the government doxed everyone.
Right. So there were these books. There was the White Pages, which was like the civilians, and it would typically have a name and an address and a phone number, and you had to pay to be excluded from that. By default, if you had a landline, you were just in it, and that's all there were landlines. And the Yellow Pages were the commercial listings. So I'm guessing, Zach, you're turning to like the M's or the restaurant section and looking for McDonald's?
Yeah, the restaurant section of the Manhattan Yellow Pages, which is just a funny place to go anytime. But 70s especially, you just get a sense of, you know, like rib restaurants. There's a lot of KFCs. It's just, there's a lot of Irish pubs.
But I know I have some friends on Instagram who like to go back to the White Pages from like the 50s, and they're like listing like Joan Baez is in the Village or whatever and has a landline. You know what I mean? They're finding these pages like Bukowski or somebody. All the great composers and artists and stuff are just in the White Pages because they just live there, you know?
Yeah. So the library doesn't actually hold on to the paper versions of the Yellow Pages, but instead they have a version of that is just on film, and it's incredibly small. And it's very precisely sort of developed and focused. And then there's a machine that will take that little piece of transparent film and blow it up to a big screen and let you find the right, you know, square millimeter of this plastic film to see the right page of the Yellow Pages.
By the way, I was trained as a librarian, so I have an interest in this kind of thing. I love like microfiche and microfilm and stuff like that.
It's the most fun research method, right? Like,
it feels like that scene in The President's Men when Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford are at the Library of Congress, and they're just going through all these cards, and they know that the truth is in there. It's just a matter of time.
You want every request since when?
When did he start? July of 71. I imagine the whole last year.
I'm not sure you want them, but I got them.
And so I've just been going through, you know, it takes a while to like order a specific year and then have it sent up through this conveyor belt system. And then you can scan it and then give it back and then get the next year. So I've been going by multiples of 5. I did 79, 80, and then I did 85, 90, 95. And so I don't have the complete picture yet. And I need to go back more times to get more scans. And then I take those scans and I manually enter them into a spreadsheet. And then I take the addresses in that spreadsheet. I write a computer script that finds the latitude and longitude. And then I can plot those on my geospatial software map and kind of see them among the current restaurants and get a sense of where they are. What's fun is to find the ones that aren't there anymore, go on Google Maps, go on Street View, and then go back in time to early Street View, which is like, I think goes back to, 2010 or so. And most of them are there. Most of them were around until then.
Oh, wow. So, and is it often new building, like the building went down and something else went up? Or is it sometimes just there's a new business in that location, everything else is generally the same, a mix of those?
Generally, it seems like the building sits vacant for a couple of years because you can go year by year on Street View. And then it gets either torn down, generally torn down and rebuilt up as something else. I think in some cases it gets just like, if it's part of an office building, it gets rebranded as whatever fast casual thing is now. There's one interesting case. There's a part of Manhattan called Hudson Yards that is where sort of all the trains go through, especially like the commuter rail. And it's turned into this like big luxury condo, office, skyrise type of thing over the last, 10 years, I would guess. There was one classic McDonald's there that had a huge footprint. It was tiny building, 2 stories tall, but most of it was parking lot. And on Google Street View, the entire parking lot is filled with like yellow cabs. And
Cool.
It's just and they have like, those big draping lines of triangle banners throughout the parking lot, a huge McDonald's sign.
They must have sold so much coffee at that location.
So much coffee and so many people sitting around doing a job that I don't think you get to sit around in that same way anymore for. And that whole building, I think, I looked up the history. I think they sold it for like $500 million or something and put up a skyscraper that has a tall building that has like a Russ and Daughters adult contempo restaurant in the bottom that takes up that entire block. And I think that building is like mostly for BlackRock.
Oh God.
So that's how that part of the world is gone.
Rad.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have more, and we're going to get to it next week as you're just a couple days out. But I think for now, cross your fingers, McTrot will happen. And you sound very ready.
Thank you. I'm feeling good.
Good. All right. I think it's time to move on to the case study.
Yeah, so this case study is simply titled McDonald's in India. It was published in September 2005 by Professor Kishore Dash from the Thunderbird School of Global Management. It's dense. This is a quality case study. I think, Chris, you pointed out it's a little dry.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, as someone who's a little bit newer to our love and interest in case studies, give us your version of like the briefest overview of what you think this entire case study is about.
Yeah, sure. First you have to characterize what the case study even is, right? So it's a PDF and it's like 24 pages long. And the first, 15 pages are single-spaced, fairly dense text, just prose, right? And so what this is talking about is the entrance of McDonald's opening restaurants in India. The specific context there is like, how'd that happen? Like, what's up with that? And the whole thing is quite lengthy, but it touches on all these areas that make a lot of sense. There are cultural factors, there are business factors that McDonald's thought of and dealt with in opening up restaurants in India. A lot of it, to me, honestly, is kind of like India 101 for people who may not be familiar with the market or the place culturally or professionally. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, from graphs that show you what percentage of the populace is vegetarian. There's things about, obviously, to me, one of the biggest things I thought of was beef related, right? Like I think of India and I think of Hindu people who revere the cow. And so the only question I had was like, how do you have a hamburger restaurant come into a country that has a lot of Hindu folks who are not going to eat, much less countenance a restaurant that serves beef at all? And this deals with that, but deals with a lot more too, which was interesting to me. It was kind of exciting that it deals with all this other stuff.
To me, the thesis of this case study really boiled down to what you're saying about how and when does McDonald's adapt? Because we think about it as this force that simply applies an even layer of everything. And I think in this case study, the most dramatic version we've seen of McDonald's adapting.
I went through this case study wondering where the conflict was. It seems like most case studies, not all of them, but a lot of them wind up with sort of a pivotal moment and a what would you do? And this one was sort of, look at everything they did and how well it's going for them.
It went great.
It's true. There's one part at the end that's kind of like, can they continue? Or I think it was mentioned they haven't made any money yet, but otherwise.
Well, that's the big mic drop. Yeah, at the very end, they're like, and by the way, they haven't broken even yet. And you're like, wait, what? And it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's so pro McDonald's at every step. And there was a little bit more cheerleading than I would have liked. It didn't have a very objective view.
It's not so much an objective view of like how McDonald's did a thing. It's kind of like, here's how McDonald's kicked ass coming to India, and some other ways they could have screwed it up, but they didn't.
But it is interesting. They do compare it to some of the other restaurants, and they talk about the politics of what was happening in India and sort of what allowed these companies to come in, and how McDonald's kind of held back seemingly compared to KFC and some of the other chains that built up very quickly.
Well, and clearly McDonald's is asking, what is this market? What is required of us to enter this market? Let's do all those things. The author of the case study makes a huge deal out of essentially jettisoning what he calls the key product, like the Big Mac. It's gone. There is no Big Mac. And what you have instead is the Maharaja Mac, which is a mutton-based burger product. And mutton, also, again, like the author enumerates, in the context of India, mutton means goat or lamb. And so I'm not sure if that means that it's different in different regions, but there's a whole bunch of stuff explaining like, in this region, here's what's going on. In that region, here's what's going on. But economically, here's the class breakdown. Here's the actual amount of money we're talking about per household. And then here's the cost of the menu items relative to that and so on. There's a whole bunch there about the economic opportunity. Then this, like Mike said, the restraint in waiting years to roll out the restaurants to deal with some of the actual challenges of this market. Like, to me, one of the surprising challenges was, I didn't really think about this, but I guess should be obvious. There's some infrastructure challenges, like trucking and road systems aren't the same as what we'd expect. There's no interstate highway system per se. And so being able to get things from point to point, you may have to design your trucks differently or your transport system. And that may limit you to certain provinces to start with.
Yeah, like they talk about being limited to within this 500 miles of these 2 distribution centers they've set up. And it made me think that this is really a kind of a beachhead into India with a wait and see approach, where I think they're adapting. My theory is, after reading this case study, their reason they're adapting so much locally is because they need to hold and wait and see until that middle class gets bigger and more people can afford the food at the prices that are profitable for McDonald's. And so they're willing to be a little bit more flexible in what they're offering to kind of hold that position and wait and see, hoping that things get better. Because I think as things get better, you get things like a better infrastructure system. Hopefully, McDonald's obviously doesn't want to create its own, roads and trains and those things. They want to use the existing infrastructure. So it feels a little bit like a wait and see.
But at the same time, I think there's a big piece there of empowering important folks in India in the solution, right? So there's these 2 major managers for 2 regions that are, I don't know what you'd even call them. Like, they're not like franchisees per se, but they are responsible for the operations in huge parts of the country. And so what they're doing there is creating a supply chain first, which starts with the menu, really. So it's like, starting with the menu, you have to go back and say, okay, you've got the Hindu issue, so we're going to eliminate beef. And then you've got the Muslim issue, so you have to eliminate pork. And so what's left is poultry, mutton, and vegetarian options.
And it seems like, according to this case study, they also abandoned the French fries. They talk about these spicy potato wedges,
which I want.
Oh, yeah.
So you don't have a Big Mac and fries. You have a mutton burger and spicy potato wedges. It's a wildly different menu. To me, the menu items were one of the most fun parts of this case study, just because it was so different.
The mutton burger is presented as sort of like a premium option. There's a lot of vegetarian sandwiches and vegetarian options at low prices.
Well, and that they tested a lot of these menu items in the UK is also really interesting. They talk about where they didn't build all of this infrastructure out and then figure out what the right menu items were. What, as they developed the restaurants, they tested them first in areas that had a population that was sort of, similar enough to get a sense of the same taste profiles. And then from that, brought that stuff over, which is probably why the UK to this day McDonald's still has a veggie burger in the UK.
There's a whole section here also about kids and families. And it's interesting. They talk about, what do they call them? Fun zones. the play places, it makes a lot of sense. They're talking about these restaurants are mainly in urban environments. And if you have a large population living in a dense urban environment and you have to have something like a kid's birthday party, having a location that you promote, like a McDonald's, to have that party in is probably more effective than having everybody come over to your house and, your place that's already probably fairly small to begin with. So that's kind of a status symbol thing, which I think it is to some extent in the States. I think it maybe was more, maybe it's also because I'm not a kid anymore. Maybe it's more in the 80s that I thought, like a fast food birthday would be really cool and high status. The author talks about how that is a specific, designed draw to bring kids into this to encourage their parents to come and, the whole family to come and eat.
And that's been part of McDonald's from the beginning. If you go all the way back to sort of the origin story of McDonald's, there was a real push to make it family friendly because a lot of these drive-ins were kind of rebellious teen hangouts and they were a real turnoff to families with kids. And so it's interesting that core element kind of maintains even as they internationalize into these other places. I think you're always going to see McDonald's kind of target children, because that's your future demographic, but also if you can win them over, you win the parents as well. So I think it's interesting because I think from this case study and being reminded so often of what we saw in Russia and even when we were talking about South America, we start to really get a sense of the international playbook of McDonald's where, they kind of start with infrastructure, distribution, supply, they get a little political support and partnership, and then they'll kind of start in these small concentrated areas, which are sort of easier to create the volume that they need to keep going. And then also creating those things like investing in children's charities, which generates political capital as well as an investment in your future customers.
Well, there's a thing in here about polio, which I think is really interesting. I've written about polio actually quite a bit when I used to work at Mental Floss. Of course, this case study is from 2007, and they talk about having McDonald's intentionally building in polio vaccination drives for kids. I think it's up to age 5 when you get the drops. Again, that makes total sense. And I was thinking, when I was writing about this was probably 2010, and I thought, I'm pretty sure polio doesn't exist in India at this point. And I looked it up. Of course, polio was eradicated in India officially. It was recognized by the world bodies that track this in 2014. It may have actually been gone functionally a few years earlier. But that's an interesting thing, again, with these case studies, you have this snapshot in time of this is what was going on in 2007, and you're kind of left up to the reader as to what happens next. On that front, I thought I'd ask you guys, they have this stat there where, the first McDonald's in India opens in 1986 in New Delhi. And then by 2004, they're up to 58 restaurants. So across 8 years, about 60 stores. Seems like a good pace. I'm curious if you guys have a guess as to how many stores there are now in 2024.
Oh.
I'm going to guess they've solved, I haven't looked this up. This is a great question. I'm going to guess they've solved the distribution problem. Those first two numbers that you said kind of represent the two areas where they had those distribution centers. So now I'm going to say it's at least 5 times as much.
So 5 times 58 would be 290. Okay, what do you think, Zach?
Oh, man, I really have no idea.
I'll round off at 300. Do you think it's above or below 300?
Yeah, Price is Right.
I'm generally feeling like it's below. I love the optimism of this case study, but my gut feel is that expanding across India has got to be complicated.
All right, drum roll. The answer is?
It's over 600.
Oh my God.
Wow. So they did it. They
really did it. And so actually, to be clear, I found 2 numbers. 584 is the Wikipedia number, but that is sourced to 2023. And then 601 comes from some other source, which is probably more recent. So in either case, a tremendous, a 10x, right, in 20 years.
Yeah. As soon as they figure it out, it's easy to replicate, right? To go back to the menu items, though, the thesis of this case study that I took away was, it's in that quote at the beginning. It's quoted to just a senior bureaucrat in New Delhi. But he says, "I do not see anything wrong with McDonald's doing business in India. After all, it is not McDonaldization that we know of. It is big Macommodation," which is a terrible turn of phrase, but it's basically saying it's India's influenced McDonald's versus the other way around. And so what you're saying is like, even in the modern era with these 600 restaurants, they are still fully adapted to the reality of India versus imposing their will and saying, you will eat a Big Mac, you will eat French fries.
Well, and surprisingly, there's even a whole thing in there about like scratch-off games with daily and weekly prizes, which the author of the study attributes to the local populace having a strong belief in karma, fate, and luck. I don't know much about India, and so it's interesting to think like, okay, that makes a lot of sense locally to say that if games of chance are a big part of a culture, do games of chance, do them every day, like give people a truck or whatever, you know what I mean? Like that's apparently a part of this thing, but I don't think about going to McDonald's to get a scratch off.
No, exactly. That maybe to play the Monopoly game, but that was a small thing that was just thrown in there with like the tiniest bit of, here's a little bit of the possible context of this. You're like, that just seems like gambling. Like they're clearly, if it's a lost leader, that's one thing, but it seems like they're probably making money off of that.
There's also a couple of stats that kind of pop in places. One of them that jumped out at me was the stores on average provide about 100 jobs each. And if you think about, 600 stores, I can imagine how any business coming into a new place in general, it can be a tough sell, right? But if that store comes with a lot of local jobs, that's awesome. And also, if it's affordable food, if it's culturally appropriate, like, oh, cool.
I think about this at my hamburger restaurant, just in the sense that there are so many high schoolers that work there, and it can't be, there's got to, like, it seems like the entire restaurant would work better if you didn't hire those people, but that's part of the culture, and it's also part of what people like about McDonald's, I think, is seeing and interacting with the young people. I think there's an expectation that that's going to happen. And so I wonder, similarly, like the political value of hiring 100 people from your local area means you can't just attack this thing and shut it down and say, this is, America coming to change our culture or invade or Americanize us.
Yeah. The ability to give a friend a job is really big. And it was huge for Lyndon Johnson in Depression era Texas and huge for political cultures everywhere. Another thing that's interesting about this is that, you might have a growth in small local businesses that employs 600 people. But in McDonald's case, they have this, 6,000 people in the early days, and they can lobby on that. They can go to politicians and say, look, we represent 6,000 voters in a way that no other restaurant representative is going to come to you with concerns about the restaurant industry. And here are ours.
They say, like other parts of the world, McDonald's in India will continue to face opposition from religious fundamentalists, environmentalists, protectionists, animal rights activists, and anti-globalization protesters. And it's kind of amazing to see that group together, because some of them obviously are very ideologically different. War makes strange bedfellows, or whatever that phrase is.
I feel like the message is you got to understand local culture. You got to understand the business realities on the ground, like the supply chain stuff, the realities of the economic world. But also you have to not just know about, but deeply research issues like religion and specifics of culture and food to adapt to this particular market. Because it's a big market. There's a lot of people, and those people are extraordinarily diverse. Like it's not like it's, a monolith, and it's not like it's, there's 3 or 4 different, groups. There are hundreds of specific
5,000, they say.
Yeah, there's a bajillion specific cuisines in the mix. And so to be able to serve that, McDonald's really had to pivot hard and bring in local people to actually implement it. I don't get a sense of whether McDonald's celebrates this difference and thinks it's important and valuable, or whether it just kind of happened. I assume they do.
I feel like they did the best they could and had to adapt, and they are now proud of that, but it's not like they went in with that as a goal. They didn't say, we're going to try to create the most like India friendly version of McDonald's. Let's go do that. They sat back and they were like, how do we get into India? It's not going to work unless we make these changes. Their hand was sort of forced, as opposed to it being an active choice. I'm saying this negatively because I think I have like nostalgia for McDonald's, or the idea of kind of some of the older elements of McDonald's. But I think McDonald's is a perfectly contemporary business and restaurant. It should never lean too far into the future and never too far into the past in order to be successful. And I think it rides a perfect contemporary line. That's my kind of theory of the business of McDonald's.
I'm really interested in this question of like, should McDonald's localize to different regions in America? And as someone who has driven the interstate highway system extensively and eaten at a lot of McDonald's, I think there are no local challenges in America anymore. The interstate highway system has done away with that, almost completely. They really don't have to adapt. The biggest adaptation I've seen in America, I haven't been to the one in Alaska that used to serve pizza or whatever, but just the fact that there's only one drive-through in Manhattan is the biggest change I've seen anywhere. And I didn't even notice that for years.
That's a good counterpoint, because it's like McDonald's is adapting to everything, right? And one of those things is in the United States, it's adapted to the fact that it can sort of more evenly distribute all this stuff.
And I think if they get the chance in India, they would do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Thanks, Eisenhower.
The highways.
And that is our episode of Hamburger Business Review. Thank you so much for listening.
We'll be back next week with another case study, more on Mike's Hamburger Restaurant and the news.
And we will also, obviously, talk more about Zach's McTrot and his audacious attempt to eat at every McDonald's in Manhattan. Our theme music is from John Bechtold's Jazz Around.
And our social media manager is Colette Wacker. This is an independent production, and you can support us by signing up at hamburgerbusinessreview.com. You can also buy some merch there. We'll talk to you next week. Okay, producer Chris here, jumping in after the credits have ended. We are trying a new thing. If you have a hamburger restaurant memory, a story, or a question, I don't care if it's a McDonald's or another chain, send us a voicemail, do the voice memo on your phone and email it to us. Our email is operations@hamburgerbusinessreview.com. Don't swear too much, but just send it to us and we're going to see what we can do with it. All right, thanks.
First, find your fuel. On those last few miles, make sure you get that goo. I prefer the chocolate goo. That's always a good one. The bananas are always great. The bagels, all of those things, they're going to make sure, find your fuel, that you've got that.